What if one act of kindness could turn your life upside down? In The Ripple Effect, Ethan Harris, a dedicated warehouse supervisor, helps a struggling veteran and loses his job for it. But this decision sparks a movement that challenges the very heart of corporate culture. As Ethan fights to rebuild his life, his story becomes a powerful symbol of compassion and change. Will his stand for what's right lead to something greater, or will the system shut him down? Find out in this inspiring tale of resilience and transformation. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Ethan's shoes? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage and hope. Now, let's dive into the ripple effect and see where Ethan's journey takes him. The hum of forklifts, the clang of metal racks, and the chatter of workers filled the warehouse at Ameriship Logistics, a massive distribution center in the heart of Texas. Among the sea of employees, Ethan Harris stood out. Tall, strong, and always with a friendly smile, Ethan had been a supervisor at Ameriship for the past 6 years. His dedication to hard work and his genuine care for others made him the kind of person people gravitated toward. Whether it was helping a new employee get the hang of things or stepping in when someone was struggling with a heavy load, Ethan was the guy you could count on. Outside of work, Ethan was a family man. He lived with his wife, Rachel, and their 10-year-old son, Oliver, in a modest but comfortable home in a suburban neighborhood. Rachel worked long hours as a nurse at a nearby hospital, often coming home exhausted but proud of the lives she helped care for. Oliver was their bright, energetic child, constantly asking questions about how the world worked and dreaming of becoming an engineer. While they lived comfortably, they weren't without financial pressure, mortgage payments, medical bills, and the general cost of raising a child always loomed in the background. For Ethan, his job wasn't just a paycheck. It was part of his identity. He believed that what made a job meaningful wasn't the pay or the benefits, but the relationships you built and the ways you could make a difference for others. He believed in the power of teamwork, of going out of your way to help someone in need, and of creating a work environment where people genuinely cared about each other. One sunny morning, as Ethan was finishing up an inventory check, he heard a familiar voice. Dave Miller, one of the younger workers, was struggling to lift a box onto the top shelf of a tall rack. Ethan was about to head into a meeting with his boss, Mark Turner, but he couldn't ignore Dave's struggle. "Need a hand," Ethan called out as he walked over. Dave looked up, clearly relieved. "Oh man, thanks, Ethan. I've been fighting this thing for 10 minutes. Ethan chuckled, easily lifting the heavy box and placing it on the rack. "No problem. Just be careful with those. They're heavier than they look." "You're a lifesaver," Dave said, shaking his head. "I don't know how you make this stuff look so easy." Ethan smiled, patting him on the shoulder. "It's all about teamwork. We're in this together, right?" As Ethan headed toward Mark's office, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was why he loved his job. Helping people, making sure everyone was okay, and ensuring the work got done right. But that sense of satisfaction would soon be tested. Later that same day, Ethan stepped into the warehouse's receiving area for a quick inspection. It was there he first met Jake Porter. Jake was in his late 30s, tall with a muscular build, but what caught Ethan's attention was the prosthetic leg that peeked out from under his cargo shorts. He was carrying a large, awkwardly balanced box, struggling to maneuver it onto a handcart. "Hey man, let me help you with that," Ethan called out, moving quickly toward Jake before the box could tip over. Jake looked up, clearly taken aback by Ethan's offer, but the relief in his eyes was unmistakable. "Thanks. I thought I could handle it, but this thing has a mind of its own." "No worries," Ethan said, lifting the box and placing it securely on the handcart. Ethan, by the way, are you picking up or dropping off?" "Picking up," Jake replied, extending his hand. "Jake Porter. I've got a little online business, selling military memorabilia." Ethan shook Jake's hand and noticed the calluses on his palm, a sign of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. "That's cool. You come here often?" "Yeah," Jake said, adjusting the handcart. "At least once a week. It saves me money on shipping fees, and I like being able to handle things myself. You know, keep moving." Ethan glanced down at Jake's leg, then quickly back up. He didn't want to stare, but curiosity got the better of him. "If you don't mind me asking, how'd you get the prosthetic?" Jake's face darkened for a moment, but then he sighed, as if resigned to telling the story. "Marines. 2 tours in Afghanistan. I lost it to an IED on my second tour." Ethan nodded, a wave of respect washing over him. "That's heavy, man. I can't imagine what that must have been like." Jake gave a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Yeah, well, I survived. A lot of good men didn't. Now I'm just trying to make a living, same as everyone else." They finished loading Jake's packages, and as they talked, Ethan found himself genuinely liking the guy. Despite everything he'd been through, Jake had a strong spirit, and Ethan admired that. Just as they were wrapping up, Mark Turner appeared, his usual scowl in place. Mark was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and a perpetual air of impatience. He wasn't exactly known for his warmth or understanding. "Harris, what are you doing?" Ethan straightened up, keeping his tone respectful. "Just helping out this customer, sir. He had a big load, and I thought I'd lend a hand." Mark's eyes narrowed. "You're supposed to be managing the floor, not running errands for customers." "I know," but Ethan began, but Mark cut him off. "No buts, Harris. Get back to your duties. We've got quotas to meet." Ethan clenched his jaw but nodded. "Yes, sir." As Mark stalked off, Ethan turned back to Jake, who gave him a sympathetic look. "Thanks for the help, man. I appreciate it." "No problem," Ethan said, but his mood had soured. He didn't like the way Mark treated people, as if they were just cogging in a machine. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Over the next few weeks, Ethan crossed paths with Jake several more times. Each time he couldn't help but help, and each time the bond between them grew stronger. Jake shared more about his life, his struggles with PTSD, and how hard it was to reintegrate into civilian life after the military. "I had a lot of dark days," Jake admitted one afternoon, as Ethan helped him load another set of packages. "Still do sometimes, but running this business, it keeps me grounded, gives me a purpose." Ethan nodded, deeply moved by Jake's honesty. "I'm glad you found something that works for you. You deserve it, after everything you've been through." Despite the deepening friendship with Jake, things at work were becoming increasingly strained. Mark seemed to be watching Ethan like a hawk, waiting for him to slip up. Every time Ethan took a few minutes to help Jake or one of his coworkers, he could feel Mark's eyes on him, and the tension was palpable. At home, Rachel noticed the change in Ethan's demeanor. One evening, after Oliver had gone to bed, she sat down next to Ethan on the couch and gently placed her hand on his knee. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice soft. "Everything okay at work?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just Mark. He's been riding me hard ever since I started helping Jake. He doesn't care about anything but meeting the quotas." Rachel frowned, her brows knitting together in concern. "But helping people is part of who you are. That's why I love you. Why is he making such a big deal out of it?" "He thinks it's a waste of time," Ethan said bitterly. "To him, the only thing that matters is getting the job done as quickly as possible. There's no room for compassion in his world." Rachel squeezed his hand. "I don't like the sound of that, Ethan. You've got a family to think about. I know you want to help, but maybe you need to focus on your job right now. We can't afford to lose it." Ethan nodded, though her words weighed heavily on him. She was right, of course. Losing his job would be disastrous for their family, but at the same time, he couldn't just stand by and ignore someone in need. It wasn't in his nature. The next day, Ethan tried to keep his head down and focus solely on his assigned tasks, but when Jake showed up again, struggling to balance a large box on his prosthetic leg, Ethan couldn't help himself. "Let me get that for you," he said, walking over to help despite the sinking feeling in his gut. They hadn't been talking for more than 5 minutes when Mark appeared, his face flushed with anger. "Harris, my office, now." Ethan's heart sank. He knew this wasn't going to be good. Ethan sat in Mark's office, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on him. Mark was pacing back and forth, clearly furious. "I warned you, Harris," Mark said finally, stopping in front of him. "I warned you to stop wasting time helping people who aren't your responsibility." Ethan swallowed hard, keeping his voice calm. "Jake's a customer, Mark. He needed help. I don't care if he's the President of the United States, Mark snapped. Your job is to move packages and manage the floor, not to play Good Samaritan. Ethan felt a flash of anger but forced it down. Helping people is part of my job. It improves morale and it's good customer service. Mark shook his head. That's not how things work here. You're paid to move boxes, not make friends. Ethan clenched his fists. Maybe that's the problem. You're so focused on quotas that you've forgotten about the people who make this place run. Mark's eyes narrowed dangerously. I'm not going to sit here and listen to a lecture from you. You've crossed the line too many times and I've had enough. You're fired, Harris. Get your things and leave. Ethan felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Fired, just like that. He stood up, his legs shaky, and met Mark's cold gaze. You're making a mistake. Mark's expression didn't change. No, Harris. You made the mistake. Now get out! The drive home felt like an eternity. Ethan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Fired! It wasn't just losing a job, it was losing the stability, the routine, the identity he had built over the last 6 years. What would he tell Rachel? And how would they manage without his paycheck? Pulling into the driveway, Ethan sat for a moment, staring at the house. Their house! The one he'd worked so hard to help pay for. The one where he and Rachel had built their life together. He could already feel the shame and guilt creeping in. What would Oliver think when he found out his dad wasn't working anymore? Rachel's car was in the driveway. Ethan knew she had just come off a long shift at the hospital. As he entered the house, the familiar smell of dinner spaghetti, Oliver's favorite, filled the air. Rachel turned from the stove, her smile fading as soon as she saw the look on Ethan's face. What happened? She asked, her voice low, concerned. Ethan stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the day crash down on him. His shoulders slumped, and he rubbed the back of his neck. I got fired. Rachel's eyes widened in shock. Fired? What? Why? He sighed, walking over to the dining table and sitting heavily in a chair. It was Mark. He's been on my case ever since I started helping Jake out. He caught me helping him again today and, well, that was the final straw. Rachel sat down across from him, the worry etched into her face. Ethan, I don't know what to say. What are we going to do? I don't know, Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Rachel. I didn't want this to happen. Oliver bounded into the room then, full of energy and excitement, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. Dad, I made a volcano for science class today. Want to see? Ethan forced a smile. That sounds great, buddy. I'll check it out in a bit. Okay. Oliver nodded, his face beaming as he ran off to get his project. Once he was out of earshot, Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. Ethan, what are we going to do about the mortgage? The bills. My shifts at the hospital can only cover so much. He'll find another job, Ethan said, though the uncertainty in his own voice betrayed him. I've already got a few places in mind. Rachel nodded, but the fear in her eyes didn't disappear. I believe in you, Ethan. I'm scared. I know, he said softly. So am I. The following days were filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. Ethan woke up early each morning, scouring job listings and sending out applications. But days turned into weeks, and the rejections started piling up. Even worse, the few interviews he did manage to secure ended with the same polite rejection, well, be in touch. As the bills stacked higher on the kitchen counter, Ethan's confidence plummeted. He began to wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. Should he have just done what Mark asked? Was it really worth losing his job over helping a friend? At night, the weight of it all pressed down on him. Rachel did her best to be supportive, picking up extra shifts to help keep them afloat, but the strain was evident. She came home more exhausted than ever, and Ethan could see the worry etched into her face. The tension between them grew, unspoken but present in every interaction. And Oliver, ever perceptive, had started asking questions about why his dad wasn't going to work anymore. One evening, as Ethan was tucking Oliver into bed, his son asked the question Ethan had been dreading. Dad, are we going to be okay? Ethan's heart ached. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want to scare his son. Of course, buddy, he said, ruffling Oliver's hair. Well, be okay. I'm working on finding a new job. Oliver looked up at him with big, worried eyes. "Promise." Ethan forced a smile. "Promise." But as he left Oliver's room and closed the door behind him, the weight of that promise felt like an unbearable burden. How could he promise something he wasn't sure of himself? A few days later, Jake showed up at Ethan's front door, his expression a mix of guilt and concern. Ethan hadn't told Jake about his firing, not wanting him to feel responsible, but clearly word had gotten around. "Ethan," Jake said, standing awkwardly on the porch, "I just found out what happened. I'm so sorry, man. I didn't mean for you to lose your job because of me." Ethan shook his head, stepping aside to let Jake in. "It wasn't your fault, Jake. I made the decision to help you, knowing what it could cost me. Mark was looking for an excuse to fire me, and I gave him one." Jake's face hardened. "It's not right. What you did wasn't wrong. You were helping me out, helping someone in need. Isn't that what people are supposed to do?" "Apparently not in Mark's world," Ethan said bitterly, slumping into a chair. "All he cares about is hitting the numbers." Jake sat across from him, his prosthetic leg resting awkwardly on the coffee table. "Look, I know this doesn't fix everything, but I've been thinking. I've got some savings from my business, and I want to help. I can—" "Jake, no," Ethan interrupted, shaking his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't take your money. It's not your responsibility." Jake looked frustrated. "It's not about responsibility. You've done more for me than anyone else has in years. I wouldn't be where I am without your help. Let me return the favor." Ethan smiled weakly, touched by Jake's sincerity, but his pride wouldn't let him accept. "You've been through enough, Jake. I can't let you do that." For a moment, neither man spoke. The tension between them hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Jake stood up, his shoulders slumping. "All right. But if you ever change your mind, the offer's still on the table." After Jake left, Ethan sat alone in the living room, staring at the pile of bills on the coffee table. He couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at him, guilt for not being able to provide for his family, guilt for letting Jake take the blame for something that wasn't his fault. And as much as he appreciated Jake's offer, accepting it felt like admitting defeat. As the weeks dragged on, Ethan's job search remained fruitless. Each rejection chipped away at his self-worth, and the financial strain was becoming unbearable. Rachel had started working double shifts just to keep up with the mortgage and bills, and the exhaustion was taking its toll on both of them. They argued more often now about money, about Ethan's job search, about their future. One night, after another long shift at the hospital, Rachel sat down at the kitchen table, rubbing her temples. "Ethan, we can't keep doing this. We're barely scraping by, and I can't work these hours forever. We need to figure something out." "I know," Ethan said, frustration bubbling up inside him. "I'm doing everything I can. I've applied to dozens of places, but no one's hiring. What do you want me to do?" "I don't know," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "But we can't keep pretending this is going to fix itself." The argument hung in the air, unresolved. Rachel went to bed without another word, leaving Ethan alone at the kitchen table, staring at the mounting pile of overdue bills. Ethan had always been the kind of person who found purpose in helping others. It was why he loved his job, why he went out of his way to support his coworkers, and why he couldn't stand by when Jake needed help. But now, without a job, without a clear path forward, he felt lost. The man who had always been the steady rock for his family was crumbling under the pressure. One evening, as Ethan walked around the neighborhood trying to clear his head, he ran into Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor. She was standing in her yard, peering down at the ground with a worried expression on her face. "Everything okay, Mrs.?" Henderson, Ethan asked, trying to sound cheerful despite his own troubles. "Oh, Ethan, thank goodness you're here," she said, wringing her hands. "My garden hose is leaking, and I can't seem to get it fixed. I was going to call a plumber, but they're all booked up, and I don't know what to do." Without thinking, Ethan smiled. "I can take a look at it for you. Shouldn't be too hard to fix." Mrs. Henderson's face lit up with relief. "Oh, would you? That would be wonderful." It took Ethan about 15 minutes to fix the leaky hose. Mrs. Henderson thanked him profusely, offering him a few dollars for his trouble, but Ethan waved her off. "No need for that, Mrs. Henderson. I'm happy to help." As he walked back home, Ethan felt a small flicker of the purpose he'd been missing. Maybe his life wasn't defined by his job. Maybe it was something simpler. Helping people, even in small ways, still mattered. But as much as that moment of clarity brought him peace, the weight of his family's financial struggles remained. The mortgage was due, and Rachel couldn't keep working double shifts forever. Ethan was at a crossroads. He knew he needed to find a solution, but he wasn't sure where to turn. One cloudy morning, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table, absently scrolling through job listings, he heard a knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But the persistent knock came again. Sighing, he got up and opened the door to find Jake Porter standing there, his expression serious, but not the guilt-ridden face Ethan had seen the last time. "Jake, hey," Ethan said, surprised. "What's going on?" "I need you to come with me," Jake said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Ethan blinked. "What, where?" Jake didn't answer right away, just motioned for Ethan to follow. Intrigued, and with nothing else to do, Ethan grabbed his jacket and followed Jake out to his car. As they drove, Jake was unusually quiet. Ethan's curiosity grew, but he knew better than to push. Jake would explain when he was ready. After about 15 minutes, they pulled up to the Veterans Community Center. The center was a small but welcoming place where local veterans gathered for support, camaraderie, and various events. As they parked, Ethan noticed several people standing outside, waiting for them. "Jake, what's going on?" Ethan asked, growing more curious by the minute. Jake finally turned to face him. "You'll see. Just trust me." As they got out of the car and walked toward the group, a few faces began to stand out, people Ethan recognized from around town. Most of them were veterans, like Jake, but there were also a few civilians. One woman in particular stepped forward with a broad smile. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with bright red hair and an air of confidence about her. "Ethan, right?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Emily Parker. I work with the veterans group here. We've heard a lot about you." Ethan took her hand, still confused. "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I understand what this is all about." Emily exchanged a look with Jake before turning back to Ethan. "Jake's been telling us what happened at your job. How you stood up for him, even though it cost you everything. What you did. It means something to us, Ethan." Ethan shifted awkwardly, still unsure of where this conversation was heading. "I was just trying to help a friend. Anyone would have done the same. Not everyone would have risked their job," Jake said firmly. "You did, and that's why we're here." Ethan looked around at the small crowd, his confusion deepening. "I appreciate the support, but I don't understand." "What is this?" Emily stepped forward again. "We're here because we want to help you, Ethan. We know you've been struggling since you lost your job. But we also know that what happened to you was wrong. No one should be punished for doing the right thing. So, we've decided to do something about it." Before Ethan could respond, Emily motioned to the group behind her. A couple of them pulled out their phones and tablets, showing Ethan a campaign they had started on social media. The hashtag #StandWithEthan was trending locally, and dozens of people had shared posts about workplace injustice and the importance of compassion. "We've started a campaign to share your story," Emily explained. "People need to know what happened to you. Not just because it's wrong, but because it speaks to a larger issue, how companies treat their employees, and how kindness is often seen as a liability instead of a strength." Ethan felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and a touch of apprehension. "You're doing all of this for me? For you and for everyone who's ever been in your shoes," Jake said, stepping forward. "This isn't just about you, Ethan. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." Emily nodded in agreement. "We've already reached out to some local news outlets, and they're interested in covering your story. We're hoping to put pressure on Ameriship to make them see that what they did to you was wrong. We want them to change their policies, not just for you, but for all their employees." Ethan stared at the screen, his mind spinning. He never imagined his situation would garner this much attention. He had always thought of himself as just one person, doing what he could to help. But now, it seemed like his actions were becoming part of something much bigger. I don't know what to say," Ethan admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to cause trouble. I just wanted to help Jake. I never expected this. Jake put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. That's exactly why people are standing with you, Ethan. Because you did what most people wouldn't. You chose compassion over convenience. And now, it's time for the world to see that. Ethan's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, he was incredibly grateful for the support, but on the other, he worried about the consequences. What would happen if this blew up even more? Would it hurt his chances of finding another job? Would it hurt his family? As if reading his mind, Emily spoke up again. I know this is a lot to take in, Ethan, but I want you to know that we're here to help you through it. We believe in what you did, and we believe in the power of your story to inspire change. Ethan nodded, still trying to process everything. Thank you, he said finally, his voice quiet but sincere. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but thank you. Emily smiled. You don't need to do anything else. Just keep being the person you are. We'll take care of the rest. That night, Ethan sat with Rachel at the dinner table, explaining everything that had happened at the community center. Rachel listened quietly, her face a mixture of concern and pride. Are you sure about this? She asked gently. It sounds amazing, but are you ready for the attention this might bring? I'm not sure, Ethan admitted, taking a deep breath. But I think I need to do this. It's not just about me anymore. It's about standing up for what's right. Rachel reached across the table and took his hand. I'm proud of you, Ethan. No matter what happens, you've already made a difference. Just remember that. As they sat there in the quiet of their home, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel lost or powerless. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew he was doing something that mattered, not just for himself, but for the people who had stood by him. In the days that followed, the Stand With Ethan campaign gained momentum. Social media posts flooded in from all corners of the community, with people sharing their own stories of workplace injustices and moments where they had to choose between doing the right thing and following rigid company policies. It wasn't just veterans who were inspired by Ethan's story. Teachers, nurses, retail workers, and people from all walks of life were moved by his willingness to stand up for someone in need, even at the cost of his own job. The local news station ran a segment on Ethan's firing, interviewing members of the veterans group who praised his actions. They emphasized the need for companies to value their employees as human beings, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. As the story spread, people began reaching out to Ethan directly, sharing their support and offering help in whatever way they could. One morning, Ethan woke up to find his phone buzzing with notifications. He scrolled through the messages, his eyes widening as he saw that the campaign had caught the attention of a few national news outlets. They were interested in covering his story, bringing even more exposure to the issues at hand. It was overwhelming, to say the least. Ethan sat down with Jake and Emily to discuss the next steps. While the attention was a good thing, Ethan didn't want the campaign to spiral out of control. He didn't want to be the face of a movement that attacked Ameriship or created division. That wasn't who he was, and it wasn't what he stood for. We need to keep this positive, Ethan said, his voice firm. I don't want this to turn into a campaign of hate. This isn't about tearing down Ameriship or getting revenge. It's about showing the world that compassion matters, that helping people should never be punished. Jake nodded in agreement. You're right. This isn't about revenge. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what you did. Emily smiled, clearly impressed with Ethan's resolve. Well, make sure that message stays front and center. We can highlight stories of other companies that are doing it right, showing that compassion and productivity don't have to be at odds. As they strategized, Ethan felt a sense of control returning to his life. He wasn't just reacting to the situation anymore, he was actively shaping it. And that realization gave him strength. One afternoon, as Ethan was working with Jake on organizing some deliveries for his online business, his phone rang. He answered it, and to his surprise, it was a representative from Ameriship's corporate office. They had seen the growing campaign and wanted to set up a meeting to discuss his situation. The woman on the other end of the line sounded polite but cautious, as if she was trying to gauge whether Ethan was willing to engage in a dialogue. We're very concerned about the negative attention this is bringing to the company, she said carefully. We'd like to offer you a settlement and discuss the possibility of reinstating your job. Ethan's heart raced at the offer. On one hand, it was what he had wanted his job back, the stability for his family. But on the other hand, it didn't feel like enough. It didn't feel like the right solution to the bigger issue. The problem wasn't just about him losing his job, it was about the culture that had made that possible in the first place. "I appreciate the offer," Ethan said slowly, "but I think there's more to discuss here than just my job." The woman on the other end paused, clearly surprised. "What do you mean?" "I want to talk about how AmeriShip can change its policies to make sure this doesn't happen again, not just to me, but to anyone. We need to create a workplace where compassion is valued as much as productivity." There was a long silence before the woman finally spoke. "I'll pass your message along to the board. Well, be in touch." As Ethan hung up, he knew this was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The campaign supporting Ethan had grown far beyond his control. What started as a small, local effort to highlight his story was now spreading across social media and news networks at a pace no one could have predicted. The hashtag #StandWithEthan had gone viral, and people from all over the country were sharing their stories of workplace injustices, moments when they too had been punished for simply doing the right thing. At the heart of it all, Ethan felt both overwhelmed and humbled by the attention. Strangers were rallying to his cause, but it wasn't just about him anymore. It had grown into a broader movement about how companies treated their employees. It was about creating a culture where empathy and compassion were valued, not punished. Still, amid the growing momentum, Ethan felt a deep unease. As the campaign continued to gain steam, some voices were growing angrier, calling for boycotts of AmeriShip and personal attacks on Mark Turner, the warehouse manager who had fired Ethan. This was the last thing Ethan wanted. He wasn't interested in revenge or tearing anyone down. One morning, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Rachel, the both of them scrolling through the latest updates on the campaign. Rachel glanced at him, worry etched into her face. "Ethan, look at this," she said, turning her phone to show him a post on social media. It was a photo of Mark Turner, with a caption calling for him to be fired and labeling him as a corporate monster. Ethan sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "This isn't what I wanted, Rachel. I don't want people attacking Mark, no matter how wrong he was. This was never supposed to be about tearing someone down." Rachel reached over and squeezed his hand. "I know, but you can't control how people respond. Your story touched a lot of people, and some of them are angry. They want justice." "I get that," Ethan said, shaking his head. "But I don't want this to turn into a mob. We need to stay focused on the bigger picture, changing the system, not destroying individuals." Rachel looked at him with sympathy. "You need to talk to Jake and Emily. They're leading the charge on this. Maybe they can help steer the message in the right direction." Ethan nodded, knowing she was right. It was time to take back control of the narrative before it spiraled any further. That afternoon, Ethan met with Jake and Emily Parker at a local cafe to discuss the next steps for the campaign. Emily, who had been instrumental in building the social media momentum, greeted Ethan with a wide smile. "You won't believe this," she said excitedly, holding up her phone. "We've been contacted by 3 major news networks who want to do a feature on your story. This is going national, Ethan." Ethan appreciated her enthusiasm, but he quickly got to the point. "That's great, Emily, but we have a problem. I've been seeing posts online that are calling for boycotts of AmeriShip, and some people are going after Mark personally. That's not what this is about. I don't want people to attack Mark or destroy AmeriShip." Jake leaned back in his chair, nodding in agreement. "I've seen those posts too. It's getting a little out of hand. But you can't control the internet, man. People are going to vent their frustration." "I get that," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "But if we're not careful, we're going to lose the real message. This isn't about revenge, it's about creating change. We need to show that compassion and success can go hand in hand. If we let this turn into a hate campaign, we're no better than what we're fighting against." Emily's smile faded as she listened, and she nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, Ethan. I've seen some of those posts, and I agree they don't reflect what we're trying to do. Well, make sure the campaign stays focused on positive change. I'll start putting out posts to redirect the message, and I can reach out to some of the more vocal supporters privately, letting them know what our goal really is." Jake leaned forward, his eyes full of respect for Ethan. "You're handling this like a pro, man. Most people would be out for blood after what you went through, but you're still keeping your focus on the right thing. That's why people are standing with you." Ethan smiled weakly. "I don't know about being a pro. I just know that tearing people down isn't going to solve anything. I want to build something better." Emily grinned, her enthusiasm returning. "And that's exactly why this is going to work. Let's get back to spreading the message of compassion, not conflict." With a renewed focus, the campaign shifted gears. Emily worked tirelessly to keep the message positive, sharing stories of companies that had successfully implemented compassionate policies and shining a light on businesses that treated their employees with care and respect. Posts celebrating acts of kindness in the workplace began to flood social media, and the anger that had been building started to dissipate. People began to see that this was just about one man losing his job. It was about changing a culture. Meanwhile, Ethan's story continued to spread. Local news stations covered the campaign extensively, and soon enough, national outlets picked up the story. Ethan found himself being asked to do interviews, where he was able to talk about the importance of empathy in the workplace, and how his experience could serve as a lesson for businesses everywhere. One evening, as Ethan sat down to dinner with Rachel and Oliver, the doorbell rang. Rachel shot Ethan a curious look as she got up to answer it. A moment later, she returned, her face pale. "Ethan, you need to see this," she said, handing him a thick envelope. Ethan opened it cautiously, and his eyes widened as he read the contents. It was an official letter from AmeriShip's corporate office. They were inviting him to a meeting to discuss a possible settlement and his potential reinstatement at the company. But more importantly, the letter mentioned that AmeriShip was conducting a full review of its policies regarding employee conduct, customer service, and compassionate workplace practices. "They want to meet with me," Ethan said slowly, his heart racing. "They're offering me my job back, and they're talking about changing their policies." Rachel beamed with cautious hope. "Ethan, this is huge. They're actually listening to you." Ethan stared at the letter, his emotions swirling. He had been fighting for this, for recognition that what happened to him wasn't just about one man losing his job. It was about the need for systemic change. And now it seemed like AmeriShip was finally taking notice. But there was something else, something gnawing at him. Was getting his job back enough? Would simply going back to work, knowing that AmeriShip might be making changes, really fix the deeper problem? Or was there something bigger at play here, something that went beyond just his job? The meeting with AmeriShip was scheduled for the following week, and as the date drew closer, Ethan's mind was consumed with the possibilities. He had a chance to make real change, not just for himself, but for everyone at the company, and possibly beyond. But the question was, how far could he push? The day of the meeting arrived, and Ethan found himself sitting in a sleek corporate office conference room, facing a panel of executives, including George Westbrook, the CEO of AmeriShip. Mark Turner wasn't there, and Ethan was grateful for that. He didn't want this to turn into a personal confrontation. The CEO began by addressing the obvious. "Mr. Harris, we've followed your story closely over the past few weeks, and we want to acknowledge that the situation was handled poorly on our part. You shouldn't have been fired for showing compassion to a customer, and we regret the way things unfolded." Ethan appreciated the apology, but he remained calm and focused. "Thank you, but this isn't just about me getting my job back. It's about changing the way AmeriShip and other companies approach situations like this. We need to create a workplace where helping people isn't seen as a waste of time, but as an essential part of what we do." George nodded, his expression serious. "We agree, which is why we've begun a review of our policies. We're prepared to offer you your job back with compensation for the time you've been out of work. But we're also interested in your input on how we can improve our company culture." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. I want to do more than just come back to work. I want to help build a framework for how we can make compassion and community engagement a part of AmeriShip's mission. And I don't want it to stop with AmeriShip. I want to work with you to create something that other companies can adopt, a program that prioritizes employees and customers, not just profits. The executives exchanged surprised looks, but George seemed intrigued. You're talking about a corporate-wide initiative. Exactly, Ethan said. A program that rewards compassion, encourages employees to engage with the community, and holds the company accountable for treating people with respect. For a moment, the room was silent as George considered Ethan's words. Then slowly he nodded. I think that's something we can work with. If we can build a model that's both effective and sustainable, it could set a new standard for how companies operate. Ethan felt a surge of hope. This was more than he had imagined, an opportunity to create real, lasting change. He smiled, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, but worth it. The air in the conference room felt lighter as Ethan left his meeting with George Westbrook and the executives of AmeriShip. The conversation had gone better than he could have hoped. What started as an effort to regain his job had now evolved into something much more significant, a commitment to reshape the corporate culture at AmeriShip and beyond. As he stepped out of the building into the crisp autumn air, a sense of purpose filled him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like his struggle had truly meant something. Ethan drove home in quiet reflection, thinking about the road that had led him here, the struggle with Mark Turner, the community support, the Stand With Ethan campaign, and now this moment of victory. But this wasn't just a win for him. It was a win for everyone who had ever been penalized for showing empathy in the workplace, for those who believed that kindness was a strength, not a weakness. When Ethan arrived home, Rachel and Oliver were waiting for him at the kitchen table, both looking anxious to hear how the meeting had gone. Well, Rachel asked, her voice filled with a mix of hope and worry. How did it go? Ethan smiled, setting his keys on the counter. It went better than I expected. They offered me my job back. Rachel's eyes widened in relief, but before she could say anything, Ethan continued. But that's not all. They're giving me a chance to help them reshape their corporate policies. We're going to develop a program that focuses on compassion in the workplace, something that will not only impact AmeriShip, but could be adopted by other companies as well. Rachel stood up, a smile spreading across her face as she embraced Ethan. That's incredible, I knew you could do it. Oliver looked up from his homework, grinning proudly. Does this mean you're going to be famous, Dad? Ethan chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. No, buddy. I'm just trying to make things better for people like you and me. As they sat down to dinner, the weight that had been pressing on Ethan for so long began to lift. He felt a renewed sense of hope and determination, knowing that he wasn't just getting his job back. He was helping to create lasting change. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. AmeriShip had agreed to let Ethan lead the development of a new initiative called the Compassionate Workplace Program, CWP, designed to encourage employees to engage in acts of kindness and community service while fostering a healthier, more empathetic work environment. The program included a mentorship system where employees could support one another and a recognition program that rewarded workers for going above and beyond in helping colleagues and customers. Ethan worked closely with a diverse team of HR professionals, business leaders, and community organizers to shape the program. Emily Parker and the Veterans Group were instrumental in offering feedback, ensuring the program was inclusive and impactful. Jake Porter, now running his military memorabilia business more successfully than ever, also joined the advisory board, providing input on how businesses could support veterans and disabled individuals in the workforce. The launch of the program was scheduled for the new year, and Ethan was slated to present the initiative at a national conference on corporate ethics and responsibility. The conference, which gathered business leaders from across the country, was the perfect platform to showcase how companies could prioritize compassion without sacrificing productivity. On the morning of the conference, Ethan stood backstage, adjusting his tie and trying to steady his nerves. The past few months had been a roller coaster of emotions, but today felt like the culmination of everything he had worked for. Rachel and Oliver were seated in the audience, along with several members of the veterans group who had supported him from the beginning. Even George Westbrook was there, showing Ameriship's commitment to the new initiative. As Ethan stepped onto the stage, the crowd's applause filled the room. He took a deep breath and began his speech. "A little over a year ago," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I was just a warehouse supervisor at Ameriship, trying to do my job and help the people around me. But when I made the decision to help a disabled veteran, Jake Porter, load some packages into his car, my life took an unexpected turn. I lost my job for doing what I believed was right, for choosing compassion over quotas." The room was silent, everyone hanging on his every word. But what I didn't realize at the time was that this was just about me. This was about something much bigger. It was about the kind of culture we want to create in our workplaces and in our communities. A culture where helping someone in need isn't seen as a distraction, but as an essential part of what it means to be human. Ethan paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Today, I'm proud to stand before you and introduce the Compassionate Workplace Program framework that encourages companies to embrace empathy, to recognize the value of kindness, and to support their employees in making a difference both at work and in the community." This program isn't just about feeling good, it's about creating a work environment where people thrive, where employees are valued not just for their productivity, but for their humanity. As Ethan outlined the key components of the program, he could see the audience nodding along, some even wiping away tears. The business leaders in the room seemed genuinely moved, not just by Ethan's story, but by the idea that compassion could be woven into the fabric of corporate culture. Ethan concluded his speech with a call to action. "We have an opportunity here to change the way we think about work, to create a future where kindness isn't seen as an afterthought, but as a core value. Together, we can build workplaces that are not only productive, but also compassionate. Let's start today." The room erupted in applause, and as Ethan stepped off the stage, he was greeted by a flood of people eager to talk to him about the initiative. CEOs, HR directors, and business leaders all wanted to know more about how they could bring the Compassionate Workplace program to their companies. Over the next few months, the CWP began to take root in companies across the country. Ameriship led the charge, implementing the program across all of its warehouses and offices. The change in culture was palpable. Employees were encouraged to take time to help each other and their communities. Productivity didn't suffer, in fact. It improved as employees felt more valued and connected to their work. Ameriship even offered paid time off for employees who volunteered with local nonprofits, creating a positive ripple effect in the communities where they operated. Other companies quickly followed suit. Some adopted the program in full, while others took elements of it and adapted them to their own corporate cultures. The media took notice, and soon, stories of compassionate workplaces were making headlines across the country. For Ethan, seeing the program grow and succeed was the culmination of everything he had fought for. But it wasn't just about the professional accomplishments. On a personal level, he had grown closer to Rachel and Oliver, and their family felt stronger than ever. The struggle of the past year had tested them, but they had come through it with a renewed sense of purpose and gratitude. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning sessions, Ethan sat on the porch of his home, watching the sunset. Jake pulled up in his truck, a smile on his face as he got out and joined Ethan on the porch. "Thought I'd stop by and check in," Jake said, leaning against the porch railing. "Looks like the Compassionate Workplace program is taking off." Ethan grinned. "Yeah, it's been incredible. I never imagined it would get this big." Jake nodded, a serious look crossing his face. "You deserve it, man. You stood up for what was right, even when it cost you everything. And look where it's gotten you." Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching the last rays of the sun dip below the horizon. "I didn't do it alone. I had people like you standing by me the whole way." Jake shrugged modestly. "Still, you turned a tough situation into something that's going to help a lot of people." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to deep purple. After a moment, Ethan spoke again, his voice quiet. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about that day, about how it all started with just a simple act of helping you load some boxes. It seemed so small at the time, but it set off this whole chain of events. It just goes to show that you never know how far a small act of kindness can go." Jake smiled, nodding in agreement. "You're right. One small act can change everything." Months later, Ethan stood at the grand opening of a new community center funded by Ameriship as part of their continued commitment to the Compassionate Workplace program. The center, named in honor of veterans like Jake, was designed to provide support and resources to veterans returning to civilian life, offering job training, counseling, and community outreach programs. As Ethan cut the ribbon, surrounded by his family, friends, and colleagues, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey had been difficult, full of uncertainty and hardship, but it had led to something greater than himself. It had led to real change that would continue to ripple out and touch the lives of countless others. As the crowd cheered and the center opened its doors for the first time, Ethan smiled. The fight for compassion, for kindness, wasn't over. It never would be. But he knew now, more than ever, that even in the smallest of actions, there was the power to change the world. If Ethan's story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of courage, compassion, and change. Let us know in the comments what small act of kindness has made an impact in your life. Together, we can continue spreading the message of empathy and hope in our communities. Let's make it happen. Mark's smile widened. "I knew you'd say that." Ethan dove headfirst into the planning for the new center. He spent long hours researching the needs of the community, meeting with local leaders, and identifying potential partnerships. The work was rewarding, but it wasn't without its challenges. While the foundation had built a strong reputation in their current city, expanding into new territory meant starting from scratch. There were new relationships to build, new obstacles to overcome. One of the biggest challenges came from within the community itself. Many of the residents in the new city had grown distrustful of outside organizations, especially those they perceived as being run by wealthy individuals who didn't understand their struggles. Despite the foundation's track record, Ethan encountered resistance from several community leaders who were skeptical of his intentions. During one meeting with a local council member, Mrs. Harris, Ethan could sense the tension in the room. Mrs. Harris, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, had been a vocal advocate for the community for decades. She had seen countless well-meaning outsiders come in with promises of change, only to leave when things got tough. "Mr. King, Mrs. Harris began, her tone cautious, "I've seen a lot of people like you come through this neighborhood over the years. People with good intentions, big ideas, and a lot of money. But most of them don't stick around when things get hard. They don't really understand what it takes to help this community." Ethan shifted in his seat, understanding the weight of her words. He knew she was right. For too long, he had been one of those people, someone who looked at the world through a lens of privilege, someone who had never really understood the struggles of those less fortunate. But now things were different. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Harris," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I won't pretend to know everything about your community or the challenges you've faced, but am committed to making this work. And more importantly, the foundation is committed. We're not just here to drop off a check and leave. We want to build something lasting, something that will make a real difference." Mrs. Harris regarded him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Ethan held her gaze, willing her to see that he was telling the truth. "You say that now, Mrs. Harris replied, her voice softening slightly. "But how do I know you won't walk away when things get tough?" Ethan leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because I've already seen what happens when we don't give people a fair chance. I've been on the wrong side of that, and I've learned my lesson. I'm not going anywhere." Mrs. Harris studied him for a moment longer before nodding. "All right, Mr. King. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But understand this community doesn't need another savior. We need partners, people who are willing to work with us, not for us. Ethan nodded, grateful for the opportunity. I understand. And I'm here to work with you, for as long as it takes. As the meeting concluded, Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him. Winning over Mrs. Harris was a crucial step in gaining the community's trust, but he knew there was still a long road ahead. He would have to prove himself through action, not just words. As the weeks passed, Ethan continued to make progress on the new center. He worked tirelessly to build relationships within the community, meeting with local business owners, neighborhood associations, and activists who had long been advocating for better resources. Slowly but surely, the resistance he had initially faced began to soften, and people started to see that the foundation's intentions were genuine. One afternoon, while Ethan was visiting the site of the new center, he ran into Alex Jackson, a young man who had grown up in the neighborhood and had recently started volunteering with the foundation. Alex had been skeptical of Ethan at first, seeing him as just another wealthy businessman trying to play the hero. But over time, Alex had come to respect Ethan's dedication and willingness to listen. "Hey, Mr. King!" Alex called out as he approached, a friendly smile on his face. "I've been meaning to catch up with you. Got a minute?" Ethan turned to greet him, returning the smile. "Of course, Alex. What's on your mind?" Alex glanced around at the construction happening on the site, then looked back at Ethan. "I just wanted to say, I appreciate what you're doing here. I'll admit, I didn't trust you at first. I thought you were just here to make yourself look good. But you've proven me wrong." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by the admission. "I can't say I blame you. I know how I used to come across." Alex chuckled. "Yeah, you were kind of a jerk." Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "You're not wrong." Alex's expression grew more serious. "But I can see now that you're the real deal. You've stuck around, even when people gave you a hard time. That says something." Ethan felt a swell of gratitude. "Thanks, Alex. That means a lot coming from you." Alex nodded, then hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "You know, my little brother's been struggling to find a job. He's a smart kid, but he's had some tough breaks. I was wondering if you'd be willing to help him out. Maybe give him some advice." Ethan's heart softened at the request. "I'd be happy to. Bring him by the office, and we'll sit down and talk." Alex's smile widened. "Thanks, Mr. King. I really appreciate it." As Alex walked away, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had spent so many years living in isolation, surrounded only by people who shared his worldview. But now, he was building real connections based on trust, respect, and a shared commitment to making a difference. It wasn't just the community that had changed, Ethan had changed too. He had learned to let go of his arrogance, to listen instead of judge, and to open his heart to the possibility of redemption. And in doing so, he had found a sense of belonging that he had never known before. The day of the grand opening of the new community center finally arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The entire neighborhood had come out to celebrate, and the streets were filled with music, food stalls, and families enjoying the festivities. The center itself was a testament to the hard work and dedication of everyone involved: volunteers, staff, community leaders, and, of course, Ethan. Ethan stood at the entrance of the center, watching as people streamed inside to explore the new space. It was a beautiful building, filled with classrooms, a computer lab, a job training area, and spaces for community events. But more than that, it was a symbol of hope, a place where people could come to learn, grow, and build better lives for themselves. As Ethan looked out over the crowd, he spotted familiar faces: Jordan, who had found steady work thanks to the Foundation's programs, Mrs. Harris, who had become one of the center's biggest supporters, and Alex, who had brought his younger brother to meet Ethan just as he had promised. Each of them represented a success story, a life that had been touched by the Foundation's work. Mark and Linda approached, their faces beaming with pride. "You did it, Ethan," Linda said, her voice filled with emotion. "Look at what you've built." Ethan shook his head. "It wasn't just me. This happened because of all of us." Mark clapped him on the back, his smile wide. "You've become a leader in this community, Ethan. You should be proud of that." Ethan felt a lump in his throat as he looked around at the people who had come to celebrate the center's opening. For so long, he had equated success with power, money, and status. But now, he understood that true success wasn't about any of those things. It was about making a difference, about using your resources to help others, about lifting people up instead of pushing them down. As the ribbon-cutting ceremony began, Ethan stood alongside Mark and Linda, surrounded by the community members who had made this moment possible. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding in his chest. "Thank you all for being here today," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This community center is more than just a building. It's a place where people can come together, support one another, and build a better future. And I'm honored to be a part of it." The crowd erupted in applause, and as Ethan looked out at the sea of smiling faces, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, deeper than anything he had ever experienced in his old life. For the first time, Ethan King knew that he had truly found his purpose. Months had passed since the grand opening of the new community center, and the impact it had on the neighborhood was already becoming clear. The center bustled with activity every day, children attending after-school programs, adults receiving job training, and families accessing resources they hadn't had before. The once neglected area had become a hub of positivity and progress, a place where hope and opportunity flourished. Ethan King, now fully immersed in his role at the foundation, felt a deep sense of satisfaction every time he walked through the doors of the center. It had become more than just a project for him. It was a symbol of everything he had learned and everything he had changed about himself. He had built something real, something lasting, and for the first time in his life, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. But what surprised Ethan the most was how his transformation had started to ripple outward, affecting not just the people directly involved with the foundation, but also his old business circle. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in his office reviewing plans for an upcoming scholarship program, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw an unexpected name, Richard Blackwell. A pang of discomfort shot through him. The last conversation he'd had with Richard hadn't ended well. Richard had made it clear that he didn't understand or approve of Ethan's shift toward philanthropy and community work. But now, seeing Richard's name, Ethan wondered if something had changed. Taking a deep breath, Ethan answered the call. "Richard, good to hear from you." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Richard spoke, his voice less confident than usual. "Ethan, yeah, I've been hearing a lot about the work you've been doing. That community center you opened, it's all over the news. People are talking about it." Ethan's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure where the conversation was headed, but he could sense that Richard's tone was different, less condescending, more curious. "It's been a team effort," Ethan replied carefully. "We've had a lot of support from the community." Richard hesitated again, then said something Ethan hadn't expected. "Listen, I've been thinking, maybe I've been wrong about some things. The way you've been talking about helping people, about making a real difference, it's gotten me thinking. I'm not saying I fully get it, but I can't deny what you've accomplished. And, well, I want to know more." Ethan felt a flicker of hope. This was a far cry from the Richard who had dismissed his efforts just months ago. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. "Why don't we meet up?" Ethan suggested. "I can show you the center, introduce you to some of the people we've been working with. It's not about charity, Richard, it's about giving people the tools and opportunities they need to succeed." Richard was quiet for a moment, then finally agreed. "All right, let's do that. I want to see what this is all about." After hanging up, Ethan sat back in his chair, reflecting on how far he had come since the day he had mocked the Johnson family at the Monarch. His transformation had been gradual, but it had been real. And now it was beginning to affect the people around him. If someone as stubborn as Richard could start to reconsider his views, then maybe, just maybe, Ethan's work could create even more change than he had imagined. A few days later, Ethan and Richard met at the community center. As they walked through the halls, Ethan pointed out the different programs the foundation had developed, the job training courses, the scholarship programs, the workshops for single parents. Richard listened closely, his usual bravado noticeably absent as he took in the scope of the work being done. They passed a classroom where Jordan, now a mentor at the center, was leading a workshop for young adults looking to improve their resumes. Ethan smiled, proud of how far Jordan had come since they first met. "Remember Jordan?" Ethan asked, gesturing toward the classroom. "He was one of the first people I worked with here. He struggled to find a job for a long time, but now he's not only employed, he's helping others get there too." Richard peered through the window, watching as Jordan interacted with the participants, offering advice and encouragement. "That's impressive," he admitted. "I didn't realize it went this deep." Ethan nodded. "It's not just about writing a check and walking away. It's about being part of the solution. The foundation isn't here to rescue anyone, we're here to empower people to help themselves." As they continued the tour, Ethan could see the wheels turning in Richard's mind. This was a side of the world Richard had never truly engaged with before, and Ethan could tell that it was challenging some of his deeply held beliefs. When they finally reached Ethan's office, Richard sat down, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Ethan, I always saw you as someone who was focused on winning, getting to the top, making deals, crushing the competition. And I respected that. But now I don't know. You seem different, happier even." Ethan leaned back in his chair, reflecting on Richard's words. "I used to think success was about power and wealth. But after everything I've experienced, I've realized that true success is about what you leave behind. It's about the impact you have on people's lives." Richard studied him for a moment, then let out a long breath. "I'm not going to lie, this isn't easy for me to admit, but I think I've been wrong about a lot of things. I'm not sure I can change overnight, but I'm willing to try. Maybe there's more to life than just looking out for number one." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of relief. "That's all anyone can ask, Richard. Change doesn't happen all at once. It's about taking the first step." As they sat in comfortable silence, Ethan felt something shift between them, a new understanding, a sense that Richard was eyeing his own journey toward a more compassionate worldview. It was a reminder of how powerful forgiveness could be, not just for the person receiving it, but for the person giving it as well. In the months that followed, Ethan continued to lead the Foundation's efforts with renewed passion and purpose. The center had become a beacon of hope in the community, and Ethan's role as a leader had only deepened. He wasn't just seen as the businessman who had helped fund the center, he was seen as a true partner, someone who had earned the community's trust through his actions. One afternoon, as Ethan was reviewing plans for an upcoming expansion, Linda walked into his office with a wide smile on her face. "You've got a visitor," she said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Who is it?" Linda gestured toward the door, and a moment later, Chloe Johnson, now 10 years old, walked in, followed closely by her parents, Mark and Sarah Johnson. Chloe's smile was as bright as ever, and she rushed over to Ethan, throwing her arms around him in a spontaneous hug. "Mr. King," she exclaimed, "Mom and Dad said I could come see the center." Ethan chuckled, returning the hug. "Chloe, you're always welcome here. How's school going?" Chloe beamed. "It's great. I got an A on my art project." "That's amazing," Ethan said, his heart swelling with pride for the young girl who had inspired him to change his ways all those months ago. "I'm sure it's well-deserved." As Chloe wandered off to explore the center with Linda, Mark and Sarah approached Ethan, their faces filled with warmth and gratitude. "Ethan, we just wanted to stop by and say thank you," Mark said, his voice sincere. "We've been following everything you've been doing here, and it's incredible. You've made such a difference, not just in this community, but in so many lives." Sarah nodded in agreement. "You've built something that will last, something that will continue to help people long after we're gone." "That's a real legacy, Ethan." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to their words. It wasn't the first time he had been thanked for his work, but coming from Mark and Sarah, the very people he had once wronged, it meant more than he could ever put into words. "You both gave me a second chance when you didn't have to," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I've done since then, it's because of the grace you showed me. You'll never be able to thank you enough for that." Mark smiled, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We all deserve a second chance, Ethan, and you've made the most of yours." As they stood together in the heart of the community center, surrounded by the very people whose lives had been touched by the foundation, Ethan realized just how far he had come. He had once measured his worth by his wealth, his status, and his ability to control the world around him. But now he understood that true wealth wasn't about material possessions. It was about the relationships you built, the lives you changed, and the compassion you showed to others. This was the legacy he would leave behind, a legacy of kindness, of growth, of redemption. And as Chloe's laughter echoed through the halls of the center, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had found his purpose, and in doing so, he had found himself. A year had passed since the opening of the new community center, and Ethan's life had taken on a new kind of rhythm, grounded in service, connection, and purpose. The foundation had grown exponentially, with new partnerships and programs reaching even more people in need. But for Ethan, the real success was seeing the lives that had been transformed by the work they were doing. One afternoon, Ethan sat in his office, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had once been consumed by ambition, driven by the desire to climb higher and higher in the world of business. But now his ambitions had shifted. His success was no longer measured by dollars and deals, but by the smiles on the faces of the people he had helped, by the stories of resilience and triumph that filled the halls of the center. As he looked out the window, watching the community bustle with life, Ethan's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Richard Blackwell, who had recently become one of the foundation's biggest donors and had even started volunteering at the center himself. "Hey, Ethan, just wanted to let you know that we reached our fundraising goal for the scholarship program. I've got some ideas for expanding it even further. Let's talk soon." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of pride in Richard's transformation. He had once been Ethan's greatest critic, but now he was one of the foundation's most passionate advocates. It was proof that change was possible for anyone, no matter how set in their ways they might be. As the day drew to a close, Ethan left the office and made his way to the community garden behind the Centera project that had been started by some of the families in the neighborhood. The garden was a peaceful, thriving space where people came together to grow fresh produce, share meals, and support one another. Ethan wandered through the rows of plants, his heart full of gratitude for the journey he had taken. He had once been lost in a world of arrogance and entitlement, but now he had found something far more valuable than wealth or power. He had found a sense of belonging, a purpose that went beyond himself. As he stood in the garden, watching the sun set over the city, Ethan thought about the future of the foundation, the future of the community, and the future of the people whose lives they would continue to touch. It was a future filled with hope, a future built on the lessons he had learned about compassion, humility, and grace. And for the first time in his life, Ethan King knew that he had finally found true success. As the foundation entered its second year of expansion, Ethan found himself settling into a role he had never imagined for himself: a mentor, a leader, and a champion for others. The community center had grown beyond anyone's expectations, and the ripple effect of its success was evident in every corner of the neighborhood. New businesses were opening, families were thriving, and the once-neglected area was blossoming. Yet even with all the progress, Ethan knew there was still more work to be done. One afternoon, as he sat in a quiet corner of the community center's cafe, he received a text from Alex Jackson, the young man who had become one of the foundation's most dedicated volunteers. "Hey, Mr. King, can we talk? I've got an idea I want to run by you." Ethan smiled as he read the message. He had watched Alex grow from a skeptical outsider to a passionate advocate for the foundation's mission. And now Alex was a key player in many of the center's initiatives. "Sure, meet me in the cafe when you have time," Ethan texted back, curious about what Alex had in mind. Not long after, Alex entered the cafe, his energy as vibrant as ever. He carried a notebook filled with scribbles and diagrams, and his eyes gleamed with excitement. "Mr. King, I've been thinking," Alex began, sliding into the seat across from Ethan. "We've done a lot of great work here, but I think there's something missing a piece that could make a huge difference." Ethan leaned forward, intrigued. Tell me more. Alex flipped open his notebook, revealing a series of sketches and notes. I've been talking to some of the kids who come to the center after school. A lot of them are passionate about technology coding, gaming, robotics, but they don't have the resources to explore those interests. What if we started a tech lab, a place, where they could learn coding, build their own projects, and maybe even get involved in local tech competitions? Ethan's eyes lit up as he considered the idea. He had seen firsthand how important it was to provide opportunities for young people to explore their interests and develop new skills. A tech lab could open doors for kids in the community doors that might otherwise remain closed. That's an incredible idea, Alex, Ethan said, genuinely impressed. I think it could be a game changer for a lot of these kids. We'd need to figure out the logistics, but I'm all in. Alex grinned, clearly relieved by Ethan's enthusiasm. I knew you'd like it. I've already reached out to a few people who might be able to help us get the equipment and software we need. Ethan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The tech lab could be the next big step in the Foundation's evolution. And it was exactly the kind of initiative that aligned with the Foundation's mission of empowering people through education and opportunity. Let's set up a meeting next week, Ethan said. We'll get Mark and Linda involved, and we can start planning how to make this happen. As they wrapped up their conversation, Ethan felt a surge of pride, not just in Alex's growth, but in the Foundation as a whole. It had become a place where people could dream big, where new ideas were embraced, and where anyone, regardless of their background, could find the support they needed to succeed. The tech lab was just the beginning. Later that evening, Ethan returned home to his modest apartment, a far cry from the luxurious penthouse he had once called home. His new space was simple, comfortable, and a reflection of the life he had built since his transformation. He no longer needed the trappings of wealth to feel fulfilled. Instead, his joy came from the work he was doing and the people he was helping. As he sat down at his desk, Ethan picked up an old framed photograph, the one he had taken from his former life. It was a picture of him standing in front of his former company's headquarters, dressed in a designer suit, his arms folded confidently as he stared into the camera. The man in the photo looked powerful, successful, and in control. But now, as Ethan looked at the image, he saw someone else, a man who had been lost, consumed by pride, and completely disconnected from what truly mattered. He had come so far since that time. The arrogance, the entitlement, the need to prove himself, it had all faded away, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude for the second chance he had been given. The journey hadn't been easy, and there had been moments of doubt, but every step had brought him closer to the person he was meant to be. Ethan placed the photo back on his desk, a symbol of his past and a reminder of how far he had come. His transformation hadn't been the result of one single event. It had been a process, one that had required him to confront his own flaws, to make amends for his mistakes, and to embrace the values of compassion and humility. As Ethan stared out the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, he thought about the people who had helped him along the way. Mark, Linda, Alex, Jordan, and even Richard. Each of them had played a role in his transformation, and each of them had shown him the power of grace. It was a lesson Ethan would carry with him for the rest of his life. The Tech Lab project gained momentum quickly. Within a few months, the Foundation had secured funding from local tech companies, and volunteers from across the city came forward to help set up the lab. The excitement from the kids was contagious. They couldn't wait to start coding, building robots, and exploring the world of technology. As the grand opening of the Tech Lab approached, Ethan found himself reflecting on his role within the Foundation. He had become a key figure in the organization's growth, but as the Foundation expanded and new leaders emerged, Ethan began to wonder if it was time to pass the torch. One afternoon, as Ethan and Mark walked through the new Tech Lab, watching volunteers install computers and set up equipment, Ethan broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Mark, I've been thinking," Ethan began, his tone thoughtful. "The Foundation is in a great place now, and with the Tech Lab and the new programs, I think it's time for me to take a step back." Mark stopped in his tracks, turning to face Ethan with a puzzled expression. "What do you mean, take a step back? You've been instrumental in everything we've done here. Why would you want to leave now?" Ethan shook his head. "I'm not leaving, not entirely. I just think it's time for the next generation to take the lead. People like Alex, they've got the passion and the vision to take the foundation even further. I want to make sure they have the space to grow into those roles." Mark studied Ethan for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I see what you're saying. You've always been good at seeing the bigger picture." Ethan smiled. "I've had good teachers." Mark chuckled, clapping Ethan on the back. "Well, if you're serious about stepping back, we'll have to figure out what that looks like. But I get it. You've been leading by example, and now it's time to let others lead too." As they continued their walk through the lab, Ethan felt a sense of peace. He wasn't stepping away from the foundation, he was simply transitioning into a new role, one that would allow others to rise to the occasion. He had built something lasting, and now he was ready to trust the people around him to carry it forward. The grand opening of the tech lab was a resounding success. The local media covered the event, highlighting the Foundation's commitment to providing young people with the skills they needed to thrive in a rapidly changing world. Families from all over the city attended, eager to see what the lab had to offer. As Ethan watched Alex give a speech about the importance of technology in education and the opportunities the lab would provide, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Alex had come so far, and now he was stepping into a leadership role that would shape the future of the Foundation. After the event, Alex approached Ethan, a look of determination in his eyes. "Mr. King, I just want to thank you for everything. You believed in me when no one else did, and now I feel like I can really make a difference here." Ethan smiled, placing a hand on Alex's shoulder. "You already are making a difference, Alex, and I couldn't be prouder of you." A few months after the grand opening of the tech lab, Ethan received an unexpected invitation or request to speak at an upcoming conference on philanthropy and community leadership. The invitation came from one of his former business rivals, someone who had once viewed Ethan's shift toward nonprofit work with skepticism, but had since come to admire the Foundation's success. At first, Ethan was hesitant. Public speaking had never been his strong suit, and the idea of addressing an audience full of wealthy business leaders felt daunting. But as he thought about it, he realized that this was an opportunity to share his story, to show others that change was possible, even for someone as deeply entrenched in the world of wealth and power as he had once been. When the day of the conference arrived, Ethan stood backstage, waiting for his turn to speak. He could hear the hum of conversation from the crowd, a mix of corporate executives, nonprofit leaders, and community advocates. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him, but he knew that this was an important step in his journey. As Ethan stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. He looked out over the sea of faces, some familiar, others not, and took a deep breath. "Good afternoon," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "A few years ago, I stood where many of you stand today. I was at the top of my game, running a successful business, measuring my worth by the size of my bank account and the deals I made. But I was wrong. I was missing something important." Ethan paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "It took a moment of humiliation and a lesson in grace to show me that real success isn't about wealth or power. It's about how we treat others. It's about the impact we have on the lives of the people around us." He talked about the importance of second chances, of forgiveness, and of using one's resources to lift others up instead of pushing them down. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, and Ethan felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over him. He had shared his truth, and in doing so, he had offered others the opportunity to reflect on their own lives and the choices they were making. As he left the stage, Ethan knew that this was his final act of grace, a chance to inspire others to follow the path he had taken. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about the legacy of compassion and kindness that he had helped build. Thank you for following Ethan's story, a tale of redemption, leadership, and the power of second chances. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay connected. I'm working on more heartwarming stories just like this one. And your support helps me keep sharing these meaningful journeys with you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how this story resonated with you. Together, we can continue to explore stories of transformation, hope, and the impact of kindness. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. Over the course of the semester, Ryan shared not just the victories he'd had in his career, but the hard lessons he had learned along the way. He emphasized the importance of empathy, listening, and above all, the responsibility that comes with the badge. Teaching gave Ryan a new outlet for his energy and passion. It wasn't the adrenaline-filled, high-stakes work of policing, but it was just as important. These students were the future, and he was determined to equip them with the tools they needed to lead with integrity. While Ryan was settling into his new role as an educator, Jordan Thompson's star continued to rise. His work on the national level had gained him a reputation as one of the most respected voices in the fight for justice reform. Jordan had helped pass landmark legislation that put ethical limits on the use of surveillance technology, created national standards for police accountability, and expanded community-led safety programs across the country. One afternoon, Jordan called Ryan from his office in Washington, D.C., and with some unexpected news. "Ryan, guess what?" Jordan said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "They want me to run for office." Ryan chuckled. "Who's they? And what office are we talking about here?" Jordan laughed. "A group of people who've been following my work think I should run for Congress. They want me to take this fight from the courtroom to the Capitol." Ryan wasn't entirely surprised. Jordan had always been a fighter, and he had the kind of charisma and conviction that made him a natural leader. "I can't say I didn't see this coming. Are you thinking about it?" "I am," Jordan admitted. "It's a huge responsibility, but I've been thinking about how much more we could accomplish with the right people in power. If I can push for change at the highest level, why not go for it?" Ryan nodded, though Jordan couldn't see it. "You've always said we need people inside the system to change it from within. This might be your chance to do just that." "I've been thinking the same thing," Jordan replied. "It's a big step, but I think it's the right one." As they talked, Ryan felt a deep sense of pride for his friend. Jordan had spent his life fighting for justice, and now he was on the verge of taking that fight to the national stage. The following year, Jordan launched his campaign for Congress. With his years of legal experience and his proven track record in reform, he quickly gained support from a wide range of voters. His platform focused on criminal justice reform, civil rights, and economic equality issues that had been central to his work for decades. Ryan, though retired, was actively involved in the campaign, offering advice and helping Jordan connect with key community leaders. He traveled with Jordan to campaign events, standing by his side as they continued to push for the changes they had always believed in. On the night of the election, Ryan sat in the campaign's headquarters, surrounded by Jordan's team, watching the results roll in. The energy in the room was electric, but Ryan remained calm, reflecting on everything they had accomplished together. When the final votes were tallied, it was official: Jordan had won the election. The room erupted into cheers, and Jordan was immediately swarmed by supporters and media. But as soon as he had a moment, Jordan made his way through the crowd to Ryan. "We did it, man," Jordan said, grinning from ear to ear. Ryan smiled, shaking his friend's hand before pulling him into a hug. "You did it! I'm proud of you." Jordan nodded, his expression turning serious for a moment. "None of this would have happened without you, Ryan. We've been in this together from the start." As the celebration continued, Ryan couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning of something even bigger. Jordan's election to Congress meant that the work they had started years ago, the fight for justice, fairness, and accountability, was now being carried forward on a national level. And while Ryan was stepping back, he knew that the movement would continue to grow, led by people like Jordan, who were ready to take the next steps. As Ryan watched Jordan deliver his victory speech later that night, he felt a sense of closure and fulfillment. The work they had done together had made a lasting impact, not just in their city, but across the country. They had faced countless obstacles, but through it all, they had never given up. Ryan's life was quieter now, but it was filled with meaning. His time teaching at the university continued to bring him joy, and the students he mentored were already starting to make waves in the fields of law enforcement, social justice, and community activism. His influence would live on through them, and through the work Jordan was doing on a national scale. In the end, Ryan realized that the fight for justice never truly ended. It was passed down from one generation to the next, evolving with each new challenge. But he took comfort in knowing that the work would continue long after he was gone. And as he looked toward the future, Ryan Carter was filled with hope that the lessons they had learned, the battles they had fought, and the progress they had made would lead to a world that was fairer, more just, and filled with opportunity for all. As the story draws to a close, we want to thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of justice, friendship, and change. If you enjoyed this story and want more thought-provoking content like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, challenge, and make a difference. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and what impact this story had on you. Subscribe now for more impactful stories and content that makes you think. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.